grammar school, then middle school, then high school, and then after that, and I've got a lot of it. I don't do all the detail, but just put certain
the
things,
big
highlights
events.
or
Yeah.
whatever.
So
But I don't know what I did with it.
On your, so we'll start with your dad's side. What's
My daddy?
what's
my
the furthest
daddy.
relative you can think? Your grandpa, great grandpa?
Now, I did not know his dad. He had died before I was. They lived in Ohio, but my daddy's family, he is Dutch German, and they came here from Holland.
So your dad's dad.
Dad's dad
came
or his ancestors came here from Holland. They were Dutch. See, Wegley is a German name, pronounced vaguely, because W's are pronounced as V's.
Yeah.
And so that was my maiden name. And my grandmother, now I did meet her just when I was a little girl.
On your dad's
before
side?
she died, on my dad's side. A little Dutch lady.
Yeah.
Clean as a pin. They lived in a little town, Thornville, Ohio. Very small. Bet ya you'd miss it. And my aunt, his sister, they had a place where all the mail came in and people would go to get their mail, or some of it might be delivered. And his sister worked there, so she knew everybody. Being the mail, she
Saw
was very,
everyone come
yeah. And then his brother and his wife were educators, and he was the principal, and he was over all the schools in a certain area of Ohio. So he and his wife both taught school.
So this was
my daddy's brother.
Your dad's brother.
I'm all in my daddy's family now.
Okay.
I ain't gotten to my
your,
mama's
your
yet.
dad's brother's name?
William.
William?
Daddy was Charles Albert, and his brother they called Bill. My daddy's nickname was Pat.
Pat.
I never found out where that came from, but they always called him, and even in business, my daddy was a salesman. He could sell ice to an Eskimo. Well, Bobby my twin brother, was a salesman too. I mean, it was just born in them. They'd make you think what they were selling was so important, They were doing you a favor
So
to bring
Charles
it to
William.
Yeah, Charles. And Daddy's brother's name was William. And then he had 3 sisters. I was named after one of them, Aunt Helen. And when I met her, I didn't know, because I'd never heard the name Helen. It was more of a northern name, And but when I met her, I just loved her. And then he had another sister. And all of them had sons and all who fought in the war. And one of them
Was this war?
World War II. And my one cousin, he flew planes. I don't know how many flights. He got all kind of medals for things he did during the war. But what was so sad when he even adopted a little German boy.
Oh, wow.
And someone in his family kind of thought, hey, you were fighting the Germans, they were doing all this to us. And he said, that little boy is as innocent as anything. He said he had nothing to do with it. And he said, and I felt like, he said, how do I know, but I wasn't the one that bombed his family. And he said, I just felt like, and so he adopted this little boy. All kind of interesting things. My family just did all kind of interesting. They were good. They were really good-hearted people, good Christian people. I always thank God he let me be born into a Christian home, because it made it a lot easier.
So your dad, Charles, what was he selling? What was his? He worked in furniture companies. I remember this when I was a little girl. He worked for the furniture company that out in front of these stores is a big dog. A big white dog. I don't know if you ever seen. That was their motto, their mascot. Yeah. And they'd let us sit up on this big old dog. Lord, that dog was taller than me. And so he worked in furniture companies a lot. In fact, that thing there, it's over 100 years old, that dining room suit. But when he worked there and he and Mama got married, he bought that. And it was a black. They used to stain everything in this black color. And one day I said, I just don't like this black, because Mother gave it to me when Daddy died. She came to live with us. And I said, I just going to strip it. So there's something called strip it that you can take all that stuff off with. But I didn't scrape it. I just painted it like a paintbrush, and it just all came off. And look at that! Look at that cabinet there.
What's underneath?
That work in that wood,
Yeah.
and they covered it with this black stain.
It
and
came
I
out
looked,
really nice.
and didn't it? And I put the legs to the chairs and the table in a bucket, and I would just paint it with that stuff, and it just. If you go, you couldn't scrape it.
That's cool.
And I did, and so I did that. But that
so that
thing's-
all used to be a darker black.
it was all stained, that black stain.
I bet
That
that took a
the
long
table,
time to
the
remove.
chair. Oh, it did. I worked and worked and worked, and the buffet, and this it was the cabinet, the buffet, and stuff in there. Oh my goodness, I hate to think. Some of it was my grandmother's. That when my granddaddy and grandmama celebrated their golden anniversary, there's a little set in there. It's not gold, of course, but you know.
Yeah.
And that one of the gifts that she had received, and she gave it to me. And so I've got that in there. And some of these vases and stuff are real old. In fact, I had somebody came in one time who knew antiques and said, you don't know what some of this stuff is worth.
So that came from Charles? From the furniture shop?
Yeah, well, Daddy, Charlie, and they called him Pat. But that's where
Your
he
dad,
worked.
they called your dad Pat?
They called my dad Pat, and we never knew why. We never did find out why. And see up on top of that one thing, the bowl and the pitcher.
The golden, yeah, the pitcher.
Well, I have mixed pancake stuff in that bowl since I was a little girl, and we were in Waxhaw, in an antique shop, and they had that pitcher, and they had that bowl. That thing, they were selling it for $350, and I said, I mix pancake mix in that every day, so I put it up there. I said, I'm not gonna let this. And I'd used it. I'd known it all my life, almost all that.
Yeah, but I think at least you got to use it, you know?
Yeah.
Right?
And,
Must have been a good bowl.
And the cups and all in there, that was my grandmother's
Wow.
dishes that she gave
So
to
that
my
was
mother.
Your mom's mom?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And she passed it down to your mom, and your mom
And
gave
I
it to you?
to me. Yep.
Have you ever used them for anything? Or
Oh
are they
yeah,
display?
I still use. I believe in using them. And the soup bowls aren't. They're different. Most soup bowls, they're big, wide. You know, they're about this big and this deep. And I love those soup bowls. And yeah, I have used them. I still sometimes will take them out and use them. One thing, I didn't have enough, and so I went out and got a cheaper set of dishes where I could have
Extras.
all the same, you
Yeah.
know. But now I say I don't care. I like to mix. I just mix them all up. But anyway, so that and some of that. See that little? You can see it sitting way in the back. The little yellow-looking little vase
yeah.
thing. Oh, that was my grandmother's, and it came to her from her. Oh, I have no idea how old that thing is.
So your mom was Louise?
Louise.
Louise.
And Nancy Louise Kingman. She was a Kingman. We had people come from England one time, thought we were heir to a castle.
So that would have been
Because
on your
on
mom's
my mother's
English side.
side, her grandparents came here from England.
Did you know your grandparents on your mother's side?
On my mother's side, I knew her mama, my mammy. That's why I said I was going to always be a good grandma, because I loved her. So she lived with, the day my granddaddy died, she came to live with us, and we roomed together. Had the best time. My cousin couldn't
What was her
share
name?
her room for anything. Listen, that's another whole story.
I'd love to
Her
hear.
name is Mornie, Mornie, Agnes.
That's a,
And she named herself. She said back then she was.
She named herself?
Yes, she did.
What was she
was
called before that?
Sweet Baby.
sweet.
She was the youngest, I think, of 8,
Uh-huh.
and all they ever called her was Sweet Baby. And she said when she got older, she decided she needed a name. She named herself after a favorite mule in her family.
God.
And what was the other? Morning Agnes. She named her after that mule and some black lady. Yeah, because they used that was.
Which one was which?
I don't remember.
I've never heard the
Morning
name.
Agnes. Mornie. Morning Agnes. And my grandmother was the dearest person. I'm telling you. Everybody needs a grandma. We called her Mammy. And she was the dearest, sweetest puppy. She didn't take no junk off of you. Now, let me tell you, my family,
What
my
do you mean?
family,
Elaborate on that. What is
my family
what would,
believed in being polite and having good
respectful.
manners, and they believed in doing what was right and obeying the law. And they didn't just tell us children to do it; they did it, and they believed, I mean, there wasn't any.
So did that
You
come
don't
from your
lie.
parents or from
You
their
don't
parents?
steal. Well, it came down from their
The
parents,
generations?
Yeah, I've got a book somewhere. I got to find that book because you would love this
So
book.
you roomed with your grandma.
My mammy, I did. She and I, Mom would have to
And
come.
that was after her husband died?
Yeah, she
Did
came.
you ever meet her husband?
Oh my goodness, my papa.
What was his
He
name?
worked for. His name was Oh gosh, wait a minute.
I can't even remember her name now. What was it?
Morny Agnes.
Morny.
Mornie. Morny. I never knew anybody. And there's a
And she
Marnie,
is
M-A-R.
from England.
Her ancestors
We're
came
from-
here from England.
Okay.
In fact, Kingman, Arizona was named after some of my kin people.
Because that was the maiden name.
Yeah. And when this man came, he thought we might be heir to a castle.
Mm.
Because he said, over there, Kingman is the name of royalty, or, get this, pirates on the high seas.
Turns out you were pirates.
I told him, I said, oh Lord, my little cousin, we were about 8 years old then or something, we lived here, so we definitely come from the pirate side. I don't think we're royalty. He said, don't laugh, they're richer than the royalty. They steal everything they want from them. So they got what they have and what what anything else they have. So
Do you know how that guy got in contact with your family?
I
Probably
don't
just looked you
know.
up.
No, I cannot remember, but I can remember him sitting in the house talking to us about all this. And I was
you
real
don't
interested.
Remember your grandmother on your mom's side's mother, your great grandmother? Did you ever hear
On my
about?
wait a minute, on my mother's
Your
side, that was Mammy. No, now they came from down in Orangeburg and down around in there. They were farmers. We used to go down there every summer we'd go down on Sundays. We'd go to Sunday school. We never did miss church and Sunday school. Sometimes we'd stop on the way down because I always got an award for being at Sunday school every Sunday.
Perfect attendance.
And we were going down there one day, and Daddy, bless his heart, stopped at this little church so I could go to Sunday school, and they signed a little paper for me so I could get my certificate of being, in Sunday school. And I remember Bible school in the summertime, and I would always go, but when I got about 10 years old, I started helping with the little children. Instead of going here myself, I would help with the little children because I love to work with the little children. I always did love children. And let me think now. What else?
So
where
was this church in Columbia?
What?
Where you had the perfect attendance at Sunday school?
Yeah, it was a Presbyterian church. My mother was raised back. Well, I remember that as children we moved right behind the Presbyterian church. They were raised Methodist. They were Methodists, and because we didn't have a car, and my dad didn't have a car, we'd ride the bus or we walked or somebody took us. But we lived right across the street from the Presbyterian church, and we could just walk across the street. And that was a church where I had perfect attendance. It's still in Columbia.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
So it was just, it was convenient that the church was right there.
Yeah.
What part of Columbia did you live in at the time?
Oh my gosh, I lived in so many parts of Columbia. The main part where my family really lived in was called Shandon.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I'm not so sure. The same house where my grandmother moved, when they first moved into it, we didn't even have paved roads. It was a dirt road. While I was a little girl, they paved it and put in sidewalks, and all that. But I can remember even after I was grown, one day we went and went to the door, and I told them I had lived there, as a child, and they let me come in and see, and how they had remodeled, and what they had done and all. And I remember my daddy had 3 big old fig trees. Oh God, I loved figs. Oh, they were so good. And he'd go out there, and the birds like to get in Get the fig. And one day Daddy was out, I said, Daddy, what are you doing? He says, I'm telling these birds they can have all the figs they want off the top, but how about leaving the figs on the bottom for me? I said, Daddy, you think they really gonna do that? He said, yeah, they better. And he made him this little thing that he could reach up and get the
Grab the
limbs
figs.
and pull them down so he could pick the figs.
That's cool.
But he had the best figs. I never have had any figs taste as good as those
So
figs.
was that house you lived at the longest growing up?
That probably, well, I'd known it the most because it had been in my family for a couple generations.
Oh, so it was like
Yeah.
someone in your family owned
Yeah,
it before that.
but now when we got older, we moved in this house that we lived in for 15 years, my mom and daddy. It was during the war. And Mama said, and we lived a block from Divine Street, which was the main street that went to Fort Jackson. And we could go down and watch all the convoys coming.
Kitty cats out.
Oh, they love to get back there.
Right. He's so
She's
fun.
fine. They love to get back there.
He's like, I want to be part of this.
Yeah, well, she can come in anywhere she wants to go. I just let her roam.
So, how old were you during the war?
Grammar school and kindergarten.
So maybe
I
like
remember in
5, 6.
Yeah, I remember in kindergarten because we used to go down and sit on the curb and watch the convoys coming back and forth going because most everybody went through training. You were trained at Fort Jackson to go be sent overseas.
That was the base.
That was the base for that. And I can remember when my mama, she said she wanted to do something during the war to help. So we all moved downstairs. It was a 2-story house. And she had 2 bedrooms, a bath. And the back room, she made it, you had windows that went all the way around, and she made it into a kitchen. So she could rent it to 2 couples, and they shared the kitchen and the bathroom. But it would be young couples that couldn't afford to pay the rent and all like that, and she just rented it to
Just
them.
to do what she could.
And all of them were like her children. She treated them like her children. And I can remember when the guys got their orders to go overseas, those girls had come up and Mama cry with them. And I remember once in a while they'd let me come upstairs and visit, and I thought it was so special because I could just visit. And not one single one of her boys, she called them her boys. The couples that lived up there, the guys, she called them all her boys. None of them were killed in the war. They
That's
all came
amazing.
back home. But one of them's wife died. She had some disease, some kind of fever or something. I don't remember what it was. But I remember she died while he was gone. But Mama really kind of mothered him.
Yeah.
But I can remember that when the war was over, Daddy worked for a furniture company. He was a salesman with a furniture company. And he brought the big old truck home. And he just piled, the back was full, neighbors and all. And we all rode down Main Street blowing the horn and blowing whistles and carrying on, when the war was over.
What was it like growing up as a child when the war was going on?
It was a little fearful because I can remember at night they would have blackouts where you had to turn all the lights off. And they would have, Mama had heavy shades on the windows so she could pull them down. But a man with I'll never forget, it was always a man, and he had a band thing around his arm so he identified himself, who would come by to check to make sure all lights were off and all. And my uncle was with us, and he smoked. And you couldn't smoke.
The light from the...
And so I asked him, I said, well, a cigarette? You can't smoke. He said, when you draw on that cigarette, he said, this is what they found out during the war. So many soldiers, the enemy knew their positions because, see, they didn't smoke. And the cigarette smoke, they could tell from the smell where some of our guys were and stuff like that. But he said, you draw on a cigarette, instead of plane, I forget how many thousands of feet up in there, can see it.
So it was a genuine concern that Germany could bomb Columbia?
Oh my goodness gracious, you! Well, they said they had submarines and had shit out off of our coast, the East Coast. Oh yes.
So
yeah.
They took it very seriously.
Oh, very, very seriously. Absolutely. It was really kind of a fearful thing. But I had several, my daddy's people, some of my cousins were in the war. they were pilots,
Mm-hmm.
And then one came back. Bless his heart, you could take like if you'd been in the military and been a pilot like that, and a plane was going somewhere you wanted to go, you could hitch a ride or whatever. And he did, and the dumb thing, they flew into a mountain and he was
The one
killed.
time he wasn't flying.
And his mother said, "My goodness, if he'd been driving that plane, it would have run into a mountain." He says, "How in the world somebody didn't see a big mountain?" But anyway, he was on it. That was real sad.
So,
But
you said everyone was celebrating when it was over.
oh my goodness, we rode up and down Main Street in the truck.
Because that meant everyone could come home.
Oh well, yes, sirree. And it was, I mean, it was just terrible to think that our country was, I don't know, and being Germany, and I'm German descent,
Ancestry,
it was really kind of scary. But I didn't really think about that too much. But then when I saw some movies after the war about things, it was kind of because, and you couldn't die. I mean, with a name like Wegley, it's as German as it can get.
Was there any fearfulness of German people with German ancestry in America? Like, if you had German ancestry during the war, did people look at you differently?
I think sometimes, yes. I think there was one time, if I remember, now this is something very, very fuzzy in my mind, but it seemed like that there was a time in certain places that certain people with German accents like that were kept in certain areas really for their safety.
Mm-hmm.
But I forget what they called it. I can't remember that clearly, so I don't know what else to say about it. But it was for their protection. But it was like, it wasn't a concentration camp, but it was an area somewhere where they felt like they would be safe or something. I don't remember exactly what that was either.
So where did most of the news of the war come from? Was
radio.
It radio? Did your family have a?
Oh, we had a radio, and I'll never forget that radio. It was one of them kind of round, type radio, and we listened to the news every night. And Mama would let us stay up because we had to stay up 30 minutes longer to Walter Winchell, I think was his name. Anyway, but we had a certain program that we would listen to every night that would bring you up to date to the point that they could.
Was a family tradition.
Yes,
before you went to bed.
We would listen to that report to hear, what was going on over there, because you didn't have TV.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think TV came in. If it did, we didn't have it.
Yeah.
But we had that radio. I'll never forget that radio. We'd all get around that radio. Like we all get around that TV, we all got around the radio.
Yeah, yeah.
And we knew when a certain program went off, it was time to go to bed too. That was bedtime.
Right.
You better go get ready.
So we talked about your your grandparents. How about your mother? Because I was really young when your mother was staying here with you.
Yeah.
Where was she born in Columbia?
My mother was born in. She was born. I think Mom was. Let's see. I know my grandmother was born in Orangeburg. She was from down in Orangeburg. Mom. Where was Mama born? Because Mammy had 5 children.
Oh.
She lost one little boy.
Mm-hmm.
His name was Dye. They knew some people whose last name was Dye, D-Y-E, and they thought so much of him, and they named this little boy Dye. And they call him Little, it was part of his name, and they call him Little Dye, whatever. But he died, I think, when he was 3. And even after all the other children, she says, there's no way you get over it. And I've lost two babies, and I know what it is. I still think about them, how old they'd be, and what would they be? Was the boy? Because back then they couldn't tell you whether it was a boy or girl. And but anyway, she had lost this little boy, but she said he was the sweetest thing, and said she'd rock him a lot because he'd have fever, and she'd put a cold rag on his little head and sit and rock him. And she says she'll never forget the day he died, and she could still, after years and years and 5 other children, she could cry over that little boy. But she said she was rocking him. We rocked our children all the time. Daddy said he didn't know if I was rocking Jody for me or her. She'd be sleeping, I'd still be rocking her. But said he reached up and he patted her.
So what were the other 4 children?
I don't know. I'm trying to think. But she said that day this little guy reached up and patted her on her face and said, "Mama, I'm so happy. I'm so happy tired.
Aww.
I'm so happy tired." And she could talk about that, and she'd still get upset over this little guy. You know, so little, but she'd say, "I know I'll see him again one day."
Yeah.
I said, "Well, thank goodness for that. That's a lot of comfort." But I don't remember. I never, of course, knew or saw him. But she would still talk
Remember him.
about that
Talk about
that
him.
little guy. Yeah.
And how about your dad? Was he from South Carolina?
No,
Charles?
Daddy came from Ohio.
Ohio.
He came south. I don't know why he came south, and he was a Christian at that time too, and he stayed at the YWCA.
Mm-hmm.
He always worked with the Y and stuff and the people there, and he knew Aunt Dolly first, Mama's younger sister,
Mm-hmm.
and Mother was engaged to somebody, this guy, and she was off visiting his family, and Daddy came to church, and he knew Dolly. Dolly said he was the best looking man that came. That said they had never seen a man as good looking as my daddy, and said everybody wanted Daddy. Everybody wanted to date Daddy. Said man, everybody was after him. Said he was. Well, I got that picture of him in there in the hallway. That big picture's Daddy, and Mom. But he said Daddy was the best looking thing. And she said so. They went to church that night, and Mama had come back, and she was singing the choir. And said, Daddy said, does she want to go out? She's at the door. I don't know if she wants to go out.
The dog
She's
or the cat?
the cat.
I know.
No,
She
okay.
might not come
Don't
back.
let 'em out.
Well, I didn't know whether she wanted to go out. Oh, she's under the table now.
we take them out with a little harness on sometimes.
Okay.
But Juno will always come back, but him, I don't know. We haven't had him long enough to
Yeah.
make that
Well, I had got a little harness in that thing over there that I used to use
Yeah,
on
he's
one
out
of my
there.
animals.
I'm just glad he's out here exploring a little
Yeah,
bit.
he is. He's been walking around. Yeah. And I just let him go where he wanted to
Right.
go, you know, just wander around.
I think he's having a
In
good
fact,
time.
Maud likes cats now because she and Miss Kitty get along.
They were sniffing each other earlier.
Yeah. Usually, if you kind of leave them alone, you know, they
Mhm,
just kind of
yeah.
do their thing.
I have to let them do it on their own time. So they, your mom ended up leaving her fiance to marry
Oh
your
dear,
dad?
she met Daddy, and Daddy never went back to see his girl, and my mama never saw
Oh,
her fiance
It was like
again.
that.
That was it. But he said, and Dolly said, she wanted him so bad, and she said, well, at least let's keep him in
Dolly's
the
your mom's sister.
younger sister, and she was back in the 20s. She was a flapper, man. You know, I mean, Dolly was.
She liked to go.
Mama was
go
a
out
real
and
good
enjoy.
Christian woman. Her whole life was based on church and the Lord and all this. Now Dolly, hers was there, but a little bit here too. You know, Dolly was a little character.
What would people do for fun back? Would they go to dance?
Yeah,
to
they
go bar?
did, and they did, and like picnics and you know, I don't know.
Events.
And some of them, they had places where, you know, back in those days, they had
Speakeasies.
them dance places and
prohibition.
stuff like that. Yeah, but you weren't supposed to go there if you was a nice lady. But I think they had their nice places to
Yeah.
go. You know,
So
whatever.
your dad eventually decided.
Oh,
he
my
wanted to
daddy
marry
said,
your mom.
Dolly, you mean you have a sister like that and you never introduced me? And Dolly said, I knew I'd had it. I knew that would be the end of it. Said Louise, yeah. Mama just kind of had a way about her. In other words, it might have been a lot of girls that were the dating kind, but Mama would be the marrying kind. You know, she'd be somebody you'd want to spend your future with and have your children,
Yeah.
you might say. So Daddy met her, and that was it.
So they got married.
He decided, yeah, let me think. Mom and Daddy had one of the most exciting weddings and the most romantic. I need to get this right. This was so much fun. Mama's Uncle Lester, who was her brother, who was the past minister, and his wife used to play the organ and all in their church and everything. Well, they were getting married in Tennessee because that's where she was from. And so Uncle Lester, that her brother was getting married. And so they said, well, Louise, why don't you and Charlie come up here and get married, and we'll have a double wedding, and, and just
That's
make a big
cool.
thing out of it, So they decided, well, maybe that would be fun. And Uncle Lester, and what was it? They had an article in the paper, Bridesmaid Beats Bride to the Altar, because he married Mama and them, and then they were married.
Back to back.
So they used to have what they call society page. And here on the society page, instead of having the sister-in-law that was from the big family in that place, it kind of went in a little bit, more ahead of it. It had big things. Bride beats
Bridesmaid.
whatever to the altar, because Mama, she ended up they married her, and then she was in the wedding. And Mama said you could see everybody point, that's her, that's her, that's her. And they said, that's the one, she's the bridesmaid, but she just was the wedding, whatever. It was just really cute the way they did it. But what was so funny, Daddy had to drive from Columbia up there to get married. And so he and a friend, I forget who it was anyway, but thank goodness they had his wedding clothes and stuff in the trunk, but they were going up through the mountains. And up then, remember when, I don't know if you saw movies about the bootleggers and everything. Well, here this car was tooling up the mountains, and he was going to drive all night, so he was supposed to be there at a certain time. And he had to work till a certain time. So here he is driving up there in his car and got stopped. They thought he was a bootlegger.
No.
He said, thank goodness. He says, I'm not a bootlegger. I'm supposed to be getting married if I ever get there. I'm trying to get there. And I think they kind of gave him a little escort to get him on, through the mountains. But they had so many because they would run whiskey at night, and stuff like that. But Daddy said, my goodness, I was accused of being a bootlegger, going up to my own wedding. But I told Mama she had the most romantic life for such an innocent little person. But anyway, they got up there and got married, and were married 50-something years.
Sounds like they had a good marriage.
They did. They really did. They had a hard time because Daddy, he being in sales is kind of a hard job, and but Daddy was a hard worker. He was an honest man. I know he worked for one company, and the man was doing some things that Daddy wouldn't work for anybody if they did anything. Sales sometimes and Daddy wouldn't lie about nothing or stretch the truth, you might say. But he was one of the top salesmen. He sold, at one time he sold where they put in kitchens and all kind of, it was a gas company, butane gas company or what, and that was a real popular thing. And he filled did all the Fort Jackson, the military base, and all kind of places. He had like I say, he could sell ice to an Eskimo. He could just sell. I don't know, he was just good at what he did. But
so they got married. Do you know if they took a honeymoon anywhere?
Let me think about the honeymoon now. Yeah, let me think. There was something about it too. Where'd they go?
It's more than I could remember.
Yeah.
We can come back to it.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what I knew about that.
So they had, I know you and Bobby are twins. Were those the only two children?
No, I have an older brother, Charles, and a sister, Nan.
I don't think I ever met them.
Okay. Charles was 8 years older than I am, and Nan was 5 years older than I am. But we were real close. My sister and I, people were so jealous of us. We literally, I can honestly say, even as much difference in age, never fussed or had a cross word with each other. I mean, people just couldn't believe. And somebody asked Nan one time, and asked us, how can y'all, this is just not normal. Most sisters fuss and fight and carry on. Said, y'all just, Nan said, well, number one, we love each other. And number two, she lets me be, because we weren't that much alike, really. She says, she just lets me be me, and I let her be her.
That's a good answer.
And that is the way it was. And we really did. I mean, to the day Nan died. That I thought I couldn't live through.
So I was probably not born. I was born in 91.
No, I don't think so.
How
I
did
can't
she die?
remember. She had a brain tumor.
Mm.
They thought that oh God, she was so pretty. She was almost unreally pretty. And pictures don't pick up how pretty she was. She had the biggest, brownest eyes, and her dimples were here. Not in the, well, most people, they were right here. But she'd smile and there'd be these big dimples. She had these big old brown eyes. And remember that cartoon character Mopsy with the black, well, she had this, she kept her hair short. It was naturally curly, had more curl than mine, but her hair was almost black. It's like my mom and daddy, both of them had black hair. And she had this real dark hair, and she had these curls. It just curled. I don't know how to explain her, but she was one pretty girl. And she was going with this guy, and they were supposed to be pretty serious. And she met Red. Oh, Lord have mercy. Oh, they'd been down to the beach or something, and they met these guys, and he had red hair. Well, when they came in the house, they brought them home from the beach, and they came in the house. I remember I was a young girl, and he had this, I called it a hat of many colors. That's when they'd wear them crazy hats and bell bottom, them breeches, whatever. And I thought, Lord, she has scraped the bottom of the barrel. God knows that is the worst looking guy ever saw. And I was thinking all this, But he took this hat, because he had that crazy hat on. I never saw, so I can't explain that hat. Took that hat off and rubbed his hand through that red hair. I said, he'll do. He'll do. But he had the prettiest red hair. But he was so sweet. And he was so good to me. He was like a daddy and a brother and a best friend. And of course, that was when I was divorced, and had Jody. And he used to tell me, he said, I'll build a room and a bath on our house. You come live with us, but we'll take care of you. You don't ever have to worry about anything. He's the one who taught me how to work. Mm-hmm. He took me in his business. I had on-job training. I learned how to do bookkeeping by doing bookkeeping. He said, don't pay no attention to any of that other stuff. He says, I got 2 questions for you. What's a credit? I told him. He said, what's a debit? And I told him. He said, they balance. That's it. That's all you got to remember. It doesn't matter what account number you put it in or what you do with it. Because back then they did double entry. See, I didn't like computers because I said, well, what do you prove it to? Because I had 2 sides where I would charge it here and credit it here, and those 2 had to balance, the credit and the debit. And if it did, then you knew. And I'd look for a penny. If I was a penny off, it had to balance to the penny. That's the way I was. But my granddaddy on my mother's side worked for the state in Columbia, and that's what he did. He was a bookkeeper. And they didn't have any calculators. They didn't have nothing. He could add 4 columns down. He might have 4 columns across and maybe 6 numbers down. And the man could add them in his head, and come out. In fact, they came in and brought him a ad machine, the old kind. You just put down. And he looked, they said, I don't want that. He said, I can do it quicker than that machine can. Oh, well, they ha, 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 ha. He says, all right, give me a thing of figures. You give them to me. You put them in that, and we'll see who does it first. Well, he did. And it was right. Yeah. But that's just the way his mind worked. He could just add those figures up. I never could. I can't do that. Yeah. I add them, and my teacher could hear me under the desk. Okay. Because I would be doing my fingers, under the desk, counting my fingers. She says, you could do math without your fingers, could you? I said, nope. If I have to, I'll take my shoes off and use my toes.
As long as the numbers. So your sister's husband, Red, is he related to our family in Charleston? Because I know Mom used to go. Who's that Mom would visit in Charleston? She used to stay with this lady. I think her husband made like a type of wood that was treated.
Wood Preserving Company. That was my first husband's family.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Is that who
daddy,
we're related to? And
yeah,
that's my
Charleston? And Charleston. I'm trying to think, but the Wood Preserving Company was the my first husband,
Mhm.
Jody's daddy.
Yeah, yeah.
Jody's,
Joe-
Joe Powell. Joe
yeah.
Powell.
I only
But
visited
his
him once.
his daddy started the first wood preserving company in this country. Now they're all over the country. I mean, if I'd had any sense, I'd have stayed in that family. I'd have been, man, talk about being rich. I could have kept those, but when I think about that, but anyway, I guess I didn't need that money. I didn't want any of it, so I didn't take any of it. When I left, I didn't want to take nothing but Jody.
Yeah.
I didn't want no strings attached to nothing. But what was so sad, because Joe could have been such a good person, but he had this trait his daddy had, and he couldn't be faithful. And I wasn't gonna live with anybody that wasn't faithful. You know,
Yeah,
he
why
didn't
would
think.
you?
He said it doesn't have a thing to do with you. I said it has everything in the world to do with me. He said, well, I tell every one of them I want you to know up front that I'll never love anybody but her. So you're just whatever. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is sick. I said Jody will not be raised in any sex. Yet he was a good man too. Work. He was a hard worker. Man, I could have been so rich.
So was that?
But I didn't want that kind of.
Was that a hard thing to do during that time period? It's like get divorced.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Because now it's.
Oh
just
my
common
goodness,
practice.
no, and I didn't want to. And I gave him every chance in the world to prove, and he never did change.
He was just who he was.
Never did change, but neither did his dad. And his dad, the first time I ever saw a man hit a woman, I saw him hit his mama.
I'm sure that.
I was
Did
horrified.
not even know what to say.
I was horrified. Well, I'm not over it to this day. You know, really. And yet I loved him, Papa. We called him Papa. But and I loved his mother. In fact, the hardest thing for me to divorce Joe was I had to divorce the whole family. But his mother told me, said, well, I'll tell you right now, he might be my son, but I wouldn't wipe my feet on him.
Oh wow.
Oh, she just
She
thought it
was
was
honest.
terrible, yeah, the way he did. And he just never did change. She
How
and I,
old was Jody?
5.
And now you just said.
But she was getting to the age, you know,
could
and he
understand.
would use her. He'd get upset with her to get to me.
Mhm.
And I said, that ain't never going to work in 100 years. I said, I'd end up killing him. I said,
The love for your daughters.
oh my gosh, there's no way anybody would hurt Jody.
Mhm.
I was overly protective of her, period. I mean, she just came first and that was it.
No
In
questions
fact, I
asked.
had to be careful.
Mhm.
In fact, Mama used to tell Daddy, because Daddy just loved Jody. But Jody showed him so much attention. And Mama used to say, you go have all the other children. Says, you just, Daddy. But Jody was just that type of a little girl.
Mhm.
And she was adorable. She was so
I bet so.
sweet. Oh, she was. There's the picture of my mother. See that last picture over there by the coat?
Mhm.
That's my mama and me and Jody. Jody and I, I'd wear a dress to work one day, she'd wear it to school the next. My waistline was the same as hers.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't no bigger than that.
Uh-huh.
I was kind of small. In home ec one time, they had a thing where they measured everybody and told you what a perfect figure would be, you know, and mine was. My
Yeah.
teacher liked to have a fit, except my waist was actually a couple inches smaller.
You had room to grow.
Yeah, I did. I always had a small waistline until I got older.
That's funny.
Things do change. But anyway, but Jody and I, she told me one time when she was a little girl, she said, Mama, let's just tend like we sisters. And Mom and Grandwe's and Granddaddy's our Mom and Daddy. I said,
Is that okay? Cool.
but she was more fun. We had a good time. But
I'm trying to think. In Charleston, I remember Mom telling me the lady she visits' husband submitted the idea for the cell phone and a lottery, and
Yeah.
they won a lot of money.
yeah,
Is that someone related
that
to
was
us, or is that just a
yeah,
friend?
that was my sister's daughter's husband.
Oh, that
Linda.
sounds.
Yeah, Red. The thing of it was when they had this contest because this company was becoming a monopoly,
Mm-hmm.
and they told them, said, you're going to have to do something to invest money in to do whatever it would that would take care of it. And so they had a contest, but it cost $2,000 to enter the contest. Well, Red paid for his son-in-law, this guy, to enter the contest. And his idea was to have a telephone that you could carry with you anywhere you went. I think they went. Well, Lord bless her heart, she lost. They didn't know how to handle. They didn't listen to her daddy. I'll tell you right now. And he
So Red
just
was your sister's husband, and this was his
son-in-law.
son-in-law. Okay.
And Linda says, you think you couldn't lose that much money.
That's what I was thinking.
Said you think you couldn't lose that much money, but you can, because he give it to people. And most of these guys never would lend. You know, they're supposed to be a loan.
You never got repaid.
In fact, after he died, Linda was just almost in poverty, and she had an attorney who got some of the money back for her. But Bobby, I think was his name, Bobby, but he entered Red paid the money for him to enter, and he that was his idea, to have a telephone.
And he won the contest?
Yes, he did. Oh, I forget how many millions he got. 23 million. I don't know.
No.
Lena says you think you couldn't lose that much money, but you can. She says because see what Red would have taught them, and what I'm sure Linda knew, was if you have money, you can't just spend it. I don't care how much it is, it'll go.
Yeah.
You have to invest it. It has to make money for you. Even if you just put it in a savings account that gets good interest. Something, you got to do something with it. But anyway, all that worked out. Because but I remember she accepted the Lord. She says, Helen, I heard everything y'all ever said to me. I heard, but I didn't hear it. I heard it with my ears, but I didn't hear it spiritually, you know. And she says one day, after all that had happened, she'd gone through all that and everything, she went to this little church down in Charleston somewhere, Isle Point, wherever she was living. And she said, for the first time, it's like all of a sudden, the Lord just opened my spiritual ears to understand. And I said, that's, you know. And she accepted the Lord. And she said, I wouldn't trade knowing Jesus for all the millions of dollars in the world. She says, I wouldn't trade it. So,
but had a good outcome in the end.
Yeah, but she's real sweet. Actually, I think your mama saw her when she she just recently had to go to Charleston. She goes every year.
I feel like she visits every time she.
Yes, she does.
Yeah.
I've gone a couple times with. I hate for her to drive down there by herself, but she don't care.
Right.
It's nothing bothers her.
She's
She's still like she is when she's a little girl. Like her aunt said one time, said the devil could come up out the ground and say boo at her, and she'd just boo him right back.
That's funny.
But we had a good time. We had bad times, but we had good times. They outmaneuvered the bad, that's for sure.
So when you moved out from living with Joe Powell, where did you and Jody go?
My mama's, of course.
Luis?
And Daddy. And my
Is
uncle, Red, my sister's husband, said he wanted to buy me or help me get a duplex where we could live in one side and rent out the other. I always regretted not doing that. I thought that by the golly, Helen, you missed your chance there. But we did. We lived with Mama, and we stayed with Nan a lot.
Nan, your sister? What was her full name? Was it Nan?
My sister's name, she was named after Mother, Nancy Louise.
Nancy Louise?
Yep.
And do you remember what it was like going back to live with your parents after that?
Well, it was different, and it wasn't too good, but it was safe. And
Better
it was
than
good
where
for
you were.
Jody.
Yeah.
And I let him, but I did tell him, I told my family, I said, the first person that talks bad about her daddy to her, you're going to answer to me. I said, she's going to have to form her own opinion. And I said, I don't want anybody talking bad against him. And he really tried. He wanted us to come back, but it was too.
He wasn't going to change anyway.
I just knew he wasn't, and he didn't. He still ain't changed. He told every one of them women, he says, I ain't going to love none of you like I loved her. I said, Joe, how could you say something? He said, because it's the truth. I said, to myself, I said, in your head.
Yeah.
In your head. But it was so funny because he could be so good. And then, but his daddy was that way.
Yeah.
But he didn't have to be. He said, I can remember his mom and daddy fuss and fight a lot. He said, I can remember at night as a young boy, young teenagers, going out of my window at night, so I wouldn't have to listen to
Wow,
them.
that's a lot for a child
Isn't
to
that
go
awful?
through.
And so he grew up, and I
That
can
can't be good for you.
understand. And you know me, I can forgive anybody.
Yeah.
So I just forgave him over and over. But after a while, you come to a point where I said, I might can live with it, but this child ain't gonna live with it.
It was probably the best for both of them.
Oh yes, it was, and it was all right because and I let her go visit. But but she got to the point where she didn't want to go.
Yes.
But then there were two little brothers,
Mhm.
because he had two boys. And I remember one time one of the little boys was at our house. I think he was coming there to pick. I forget what the reason was. And I remember the little guy, bless his heart, he says, because he just loved Jody. But he'd see Jody, you'd have to leave, He says, why can't we just all live together?
Oh.
And I said, out of the mouth of babes.
They don't
Why
understand,
can't
do
we? Because as they grew up, one of those boys killed himself. I think they were, but one of the boys was very sensitive. Because Doris, in fact, I knew the girl he married second, his wife. And then she called me up, boo-hooing, he did this, he left me, he did. And I said, Doris, shut up. I said, you knew you were the only friend I confided in. You knew exactly what he was like. You knew exactly what he did. And you married him. Now you're coming to me? I said, you didn't come to me to ask me if you should marry him. I said, you didn't because you knew you shouldn't have. But anyway, that was another whole story.
That's who he had the two boys
Then he
with?
had, Yep. She ended up leaving him too. But those little boys were so dead, and I used to feel so sorry for them because they were so sensitive. And to think that they had to live with him as their daddy. But they did. They grew up. They did pretty good, I think. I don't know whatever really happened to them. But
So how long was it after you moved back in with your parents that you met Jim?
well,
Because Jody would have been about 5, around there.
his mom, who had divorced his dad, was remarried. She and her husband lived in this. It was a 4-apartment, building, and let me think a minute how that went. Jim's mother lived there. She and her husband, and Bobby and Grace, my sister-in-law, Bobby's first wife, lived there. And see, I was over there
Visiting Bobby.
with them because I would go there a lot and with the girls and Jody. I'd get the girls and all, and I was over there a lot. And one day Zella said, and I knew Zell, I knew her and Tommy. But I knew her before I knew Jim. And
Zella
Nolan
Who was that?
Zella was let's see, I'm trying to think. Jim's mom, what was her name?
I like that name, Zella.
I think it was Zella. But anyway, and she just one day made the statement. She says, I've got a son that's going to be coming home on leave soon. Said, I'd like for you to meet him or something like that. Well, I thought, I told people, quit introducing me. I didn't like men. I said, I hardly like my own daddy. I said, I ain't dating nobody. I said, there's one thing I'm not interested in is dating anybody. She said, well, I just thought maybe since he was going to be on leave, whatever. So I said, well, I'll meet him.
Yeah.
So I went over there to eat or whatever, met him, and he, we both smoked then, and he wanted to go. He needed a pack of cigarettes or something. He said, let's just go. I need to go get a pack of cigarettes. Why don't you just ride with me and we'll go get. Back then they had those drive-ins where you drive in, and get something to drink. And just get something to drink or something like that. And so I did. And his mama told me, he says he came in that night and came upstairs. He says, I'm going to marry her. Well, I wouldn't even talk to him. He called me on the telephone. I tell Mama, you tell him I'm not here. Mama said, well, then you better get out in the backyard or somewhere because I don't lie. And so I wouldn't talk to him. I didn't want to talk to him. I wasn't wanting that.
Was there
Something was
any reason?
wrong with him.
Any reason in particular?
Just because I'd had a bad marriage,
Yeah.
and I in fact
You didn't want to be.
I was not interested in any such relationships at all. But I remember Mr. Finch, Nan's father-in-law, said one time, "Well, you're so used to dating and being married to and going with all these guys that are so bad, you don't know a nice guy when you see one." I got to thinking about that. Well, maybe that's the truth, So I thought, well, what's wrong with going to a movie, and doing something like that? So I broke down. We went to the UFO. That's where we went. The military, where during the war they always had UFOs where UFO, USO. And you could go. They danced and everything, and all. And he was a really nice guy, and I don't know. So I guess somehow or another I started dating him. But anyway, he did. He went home that night and told his mama he's gonna marry me.
What did Jody think of him?
Well, she was calling him daddy before we even got married. She liked him. He was smart. He knew how to get to me. He knew how to get me. He knew if he had Jody on his side, he could do something. So anyway.
So he was on leave when you met. Did he go back?
Yeah, he stayed in the service. In fact, that's why we went to Omaha, because when we got married, we went to Omaha, Nebraska. He was stationed at Alfred Air Force Base. I didn't even know what he did until about 3 years after he was out. He was a photo interpretation specialist. Those planes way up there that took them pictures down here, he could read them.
Oh, cool.
He could look at something and see in it what you just couldn't see.
If there were missiles.
He could see wider. He could see deeper. He had this exceptional eyesight. He really did. And he had one of the highest clearances you can get.
I bet that had
He
to
worked
be,
3 floors underground in a vault. I mean, they locked him in. You couldn't get out.
That's how you know it's secret.
Yeah. And I didn't know what he did until years after we were married.
I bet that had to be an exciting time moving from Columbia to Nebraska.
I'd never been away from home. Here we are. My daddy, Mama said she thought my daddy was going to die. Said it really affected him worse than when my sister died. He said, well, when she died, I knew where she was, but I didn't know. He gave me this thing of money. He said, now, you keep this in case you need to get home. You go buy y'all a bus ticket and come home. Oh, he was so worried about me. But, Lord, when we came home that first year, he thought that the sun rose and set on Jim Warren because he was so good to me and Jody. And he just couldn't believe it.
It's like the exact
and from
opposite.
and from then on, and he really was. He was really a good man.
Yeah.
And Jody loved him. She called him Daddy, I think. She was calling him Daddy before we got married. I said, that man's smarter. I said, he's pretty smart. He decided he knew if he could get her, he could get me.
It worked out for him.
Yeah. But he was. We had a good marriage. And he was sincere.
Yeah, I loved him growing up.
He was, yeah. And he loved y'all. And remember, and course you were with us the most. Remember we go to the beach. We homeschooled you,
Yep.
and we had more fun with you because we could go to the beach and go anywhere. And we just take your books with us. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And I remember one time we were down there at the beach and I had my chair down there and you were out there in the thing swimming and I yelled, I didn't want you past your ankles. And finally he looked at me, he said, now do you want to go back to the campground or do you want, he says, I was in the Navy. I'm a sufficient lifeguard. If anything happened to him, I could definitely go get him. And he says, the water's not even up to his knee. I said, yeah, but when the waves come, they're, high, and I was about, I did. I turned around where I couldn't watch.
I think we were pretty safe.
Nobody wanted Grandma at the beach with them.
You just cared.
None of the kids.
You cared too much.
I did. Oh, and I thought, oh Lord, what if something? But anyway, Daddy and Mama were on their honeymoon, and they told me about Daddy had to rescue a lady out of the ocean. The undertow had taken this whole group out. And it took him hours to get her back in. Oh wow! Because you have to go side with the, you can't just come in.
You can't come straight back.
And Mama said all he said was her start digging a hole, And Mama thought, Lord, is he gone crazy? What does he want me to dig a hole? She said, but she did it. And because when you dig the hole, the sand is all
Mounding
up in a
up.
pile. And said when Daddy brought that, because he had rescued a lady once, some people once before, but he'd been a lifeguard and he had that kind of training, whatever it is. And Mama said when he brought her back, he just laid her across that, where she was like this, over that sand, and he would do that maneuver on her, and said the water just gushed out of her ears, out of her nose, out of her mouth,
Wow.
and all to get, because her lungs were so. Well, she'd have drowned
Wow.
if he hadn't have gone to get her.
Guess he was
And
in the
Mama
right
said
place.
if I hadn't have been obedient and just did what
I
he
know.
said do, didn't know why. I tell you, they have some good stories to tell. Somebody said one time, you need to write a book.
Right.
There's a lesson in everything you've experienced.
So how long were you and Jim married?
50, I think just a few, not just a few days for my 50th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
But he'd gotten sick. He'd never really been sick. But I made him go get a check. In fact, I knew something was wrong.
What made
You can just
what
tell.
made you decide that something was wrong and
Just the way he acted, just the way I knew.
Different.
I knew something was wrong. But he was one of these. After he got through with and got his retirement and all after the he was in the Navy, the Air Force, and the National Guard. And after so long time, I said, honey, you got 13 years of nothing. Why don't you go in the reserve or something so you can get your 20 years? Thank God that's what I live on. I mean, all my medical's paid, and I've got the old coverage, which is
Better.
way better. And because of my age, they don't mess with us. But back then, see, now they pay them more. But back then, that was part of your incentive, was your retirement. And so it's good, and I can't complain about my government. And no way I can complain about my government. They are good to me.
Yeah.
And
So after he got done with retired from work, he was a computer.
he worked in computer. Well, that's what he said one time. That he was one of the first students that went to the tech school in Columbia. It's Midland Tech now. I think it was something else when he first started. But they had just come in, and they gave where he was working, and I think it was while he was still in the National Guard. But anyway, they gave him an aptitude test, and he scored so high, they came after him. Well, I can't remember how all that went, but so I told him one day, I said, you got 13 years nothing, you ought to go get the National Guard stuff. So he went, and because the computers were just all coming in, and so they asked him because they had seen, that on his record, and they'd asked him if he'd be interested. And one day he was talking on the telephone, and I heard him in there talking to somebody. He said, oh, man, don't throw me in that briar patch. I said, honey, who are you talking to? He said, my new commanding officer. Don't you throw me in that briar patch. But they told him that, would he be interested? He said, I tried not to be too excited. But then that's what he did. And then he went to Midland Tech. He decided he'd go to school.
He started his new
And
career.
he really got in on the ground floor of computers. I used to have one time I had a computer, 2 or 3 of them sitting in 3 rooms in the house. He was always on that computer.
Wow.
But and that's when he met this man who Jim wasn't the type of person who could have sat in an office and done the same thing over and over. But he met this guy who had a company, and they did contract work. Like he would go in to say somebody's computers and their system wouldn't work. Honey, he could find anything that was wrong with that thing, and he could fix it. And so that's what he ended up doing. So therefore, he would go and he would get it fixed. Then he could go to
Start
another
something
job,
new.
and he didn't have to just sit with repetition, because he just couldn't do that.
I remember when he retired, he was so happy. He had a shirt that said, I'm retired and loving it.
Yes, yeah, and I had one too.
Yeah, I remember.
We both had it. In
navy
fact, I
blue.
still got it back there somewhere. Retired and loving it. But anyway, he loved doing that computer work. And so anyway, that's how he got into that. And it did make a good living. Well, that's how David Dixon. What David did when he first got here, when they got married or something. I think he was something at McDonald's or something. He was being trained to be manager or something. And Jim looked at him one day and said, "David, ain't no way you need to do that kind of work. You too smart." And I don't know, but Jim got him hooked up. And I think it was Springs or something. They'd gone his contract, but David got started in the computers.
Mm.
And I think he's still
doing
that.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's good. But Jim said, I knew he was good. I knew he just he just thought right.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you got to have a certain thinking pattern. But Jim was good, and that's why so many times he would see fault in people. And I used to tell him, honey, these poor children, you just always seeing something. He says, but I'm just doing it so they can be better. Not. Mm-hmm. I said, but it sounds like criticism, mm-hmm. To them. You got to be careful. But he always wanted to, if something was wrong with something, he didn't want to criticize it. He wanted to make it better.
Yeah.
And but Lord, he just loved you. We had a good time though. He did.
I remember.
He loved you boys. He loved home.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed all my time with him. We'd go fishing, camping.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff.
Oh, loved camping. Mm-hmm. We really got hooked on camping.
Yeah.
First time I camped was in a tent we rented from the military, and I had this thing. I literally was sleeping on the ground, and it was freezing cold.
Was it a recreational camping trip? Like you guys decided to go camping?
Yeah, we just decided we were gonna go camping. Yeah. And I don't know how, but we did, and we ended up though, man, with that camper. We moved up. We just moved up now, but that one little pop-up camper thing we had, we loved it because it was like sleeping outside, but you were like in a screened-in room. But when we got older, we decided we wanted comfort. And I remember one day we were down at the beach, and he says, "Come on, honey, we got anything to do for a couple of us. Before we go eat supper." He said, "Let's go look at some campers." I should have known that was not anything for me to do. And we walked in that camper because we looked at a lot of them, but there was something about that camper. In fact, David's got it now. But I liked it because it had a double bed in the back and a double bed in the front. But up above the double bed in the back was the bunk beds.
Mm-hmm. I remember.
And then the sofa thing you could sleep in, so it had a lot of rooms. And then we bought that. He bought me a screened-in room because I like to sit out. But the mosquitoes just loved me. They didn't eat nobody but me. No, for a while it was not. It was me they wouldn't eat. They didn't bite. Jody said I ate too much salt. I was too salty. But anyway, for some reason, he got me that screened-in room. And then we used to sleep out there. We'd fight over who'd get to sleep.
Yeah,
but I didn't want to sit.
Perfect temperature.
He didn't want me sitting out that night. He liked to sit inside and watch TV.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't want me out there, because he bought that screened-in room. And that, oh, Lord, that was a good thing.
Good call.
Then I stayed out there. We'd cook out there and sleep out there. But,
those are good times.
Yeah, we really had a good time. We should take Nathan with us because he was homeschooled.
Yeah.
So we go down there.
Oh, that's awesome.
I learned a lot.
Yeah.
Since I didn't have a high school diploma, I was learning all that history and all that. History and science was what I loved to work with, young. Don't give me the math now. I don't like math.
Was there any certain reason you decided to drop out of high school? Or did you just not?
Oh, I never did like school.
Wasn't for you?
I never liked school, honey. I got married. Back then, they used to get married young. All my friends got married young. No, I got married.
That was the two options?
Yeah.
Get married.
Yeah, man. I'd rather
So were there not many
school.
women in the workforce when you were...
Well, the way I got to work, Red was the one that gave me my job because not having a high school diploma or anything, it's hard to get. And back then, I wouldn't lie about it. And so I went to work for Richland Orca for Red, and he taught me bookkeeping. Like I said, he asked me, tell me what a credit is, tell me where a debit is. They balance. Now that's it. You just got a 4-year degree. So I really learned it by doing it.
Yeah, on the job training.
And one job I went to, this man told me, he says, You know, he says, because I had a hard time getting an interview because with no high school diploma, and I wouldn't lie about it. That one man, it was Aetna Insurance Company, I'll never forget. And I went, and he wanted to hire me so bad because of my experience. If they'd give me a test on doing the work, I could have flown. In fact, when I finally got one of those tests, I aced it. I mean, I didn't miss nothing on it, but they give you all this other junk that didn't have a thing to do with what I was going to do. But anyway, I went there, and he said, you know why we usually don't even interview? I said, I know that. This was, I think, when we moved, when Jim went in service, and I had to go to work. And he said, what impressed me, he said, most girls, especially Southern, they don't speak proper grammar. They don't speak English. And said, you've got to represent my company, you know. And said, their speech is so bad. And I said, well, my mother was a grammar teacher. If that tells you anything, I was taught to speak correctly from the time I was taught to talk from my mother. And I know we had a lot of people that these guys would come to. I actually went to this night school or whatever, because they said so many of them, when they get into business, they want to be able to do it properly and speak properly. And said no matter what you learn, you can know every part of speech and how it should be used and all. But when you start talking, you fall right back
What you grew up
to
with.
what you grew up with.
Yeah.
But he said what impressed me talking to you was that you speak proper English, and that impressed me. So that's what got me the job. So I said, thank you, Mama.
Thanks again.
And I kept that job a long time. I was working with people with master's degree. They were asking me questions.
That's funny. Well, my battery's about to die on here, so
Oh,
we
my
can pick this
goodness.
up again another time.
You really recording all this?
Yeah, video.
Well, that could be
Or
my
not,
book.
yeah, audio.
That could be. Can you put it in book form?
Yeah, that's why I'm doing it.
Well,
so
good. I'll give you
all this
part
stuff
of my.
I don't know about.
I'll
my
give you
family
part of my royalties from my book.
But yeah, we can talk some more later.
Yeah.
There's so much to say. I don't think you can do it all in one.
Well, my good. And the thing of it is, everything you think about reminds you of something else. So I try not to get off on tangents.
Sometimes those are the most interesting things.
Yeah, but there's so much, and there's so many people involved in my life.
Yeah, you've met a lot of people. Helped a lot of people.
Yeah. I was talking to Linda one day, and I said somebody, I don't know if it was Chris, who, whatever, and I said, I'll tell you one thing now. This is the way I feel about it. I said, one day I'm going to die, and y'all going to all come to my funeral, and y'all are going to be having a good time, and I'm not going to be there. And I just don't particularly care for that at all. I think we should have a family reunion now, and I can be there, and you are excused from coming to my funeral. It's going to be a graveside funeral at Fort Jackson. Right, I'll be buried right with Jim. And down there they'll do, I mean,